All right, everyone, we're going to go ahead and kick things off. Hello to all that are here. I'm Eric Velarde, and I'm going to be the virtual host for today's workshop, which is Bridging the Cultural Divide, Cultural Responsiveness as a Key Ingredient to Achieving Equity and Inclusion and STEM. I would like to remind you all of a few items before our presenter gets started. Please feel free to use the chat box throughout the session and keep yourself on mute while the presenter is speaking. As a gentle reminder, a link to our conference agreements can be found in the chat box. At the end of the workshop session, our presenters will stay online for about 20 minutes for a Q&A from participants. And also don't forget to fill out the evaluation at the end of the workshop session to get entered into our drawing for door prizes at the closing session at the end of the day today. Thank you all for being here today. Our workshop, once again, is Bridging the Cultural Divide, Cultural Responsiveness as a Key Ingredient to Achieving Equity and Inclusion in STEM, and is being facilitated today by Brenda Britsch, Karen Peterson, and Alicia Santiago. Brenda is a senior research scientist and currently serves as co-principal investigator on the National Girls Collaborative Project. Brenda believes in the potential of research to transform practice and works to make research accessible to a broad audience of educators and other professionals invested in equity in science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Karen is the Chief Executive Officer for the National Girls Collaborative. She has over 25 years of experience in education as a classroom teacher, university instructor, teacher educator, program administrator, and researcher. Currently, Karen is the principal investigator for the National Girls Collaborative Project. Designed by her, the NGCP seeks to maximize access to shared resources for public and private sector organizations interested in expanding girls' participation in STEM. Alicia is a scientist and a cultural and diversity consultant. She has a PhD in developmental neurobiology from the University of California, Davis. As a neurobiologist, Alicia studied how molecules guide the movement of neurons within an embryo. She's also a Fulbright specialist focused on promoting diversity and increasing access to high-quality learning opportunities in STEM. She is a co-principal investigator for Cerebro EDU, a federally funded media and community-based outreach project designed to inspire and encourage STEM learning and participation for Latinx youth and develop their interest in STEM careers. Thank you all for being here and for what I am sure is going to be a wonderful workshop. I'm going to turn it over to each of you. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Eric. I appreciate that introduction. And welcome to all of you. We'd love to know, we'd like you to introduce yourself in the chat. And that's sort of a good warm up because we're going to be really interactive today. So we're looking forward to seeing your questions and comments in the chat. So if you could introduce yourself and let us know where you're located, it would be great to get a sense of where you all are. I'm going to give you just a very short overview of the National Girls Collaborative Project. We've been really pleased to be working with STEM Next on the Million Girl Moonshot initiative. And so we've been talking with many of the after-school networks across the United States over the last few months. And so it's great to be with you virtually in Alaska today. And I'm Karen Peterson, by the way, and I will soon be turning it over to my colleague Brenda and then Alicia as well. And I'll warn you that the three of us have been working together for a really long time on both the National Girls Collaborative Project and we work closely together on SciGirls. And if you don't know about SciGirls, we'll put the link in the chat. And so we'll try to be as professional as possible. But we do love working together and we love presenting this content and hearing from all of you. So we're really looking forward to your contributions in the chat. So the National Girls Collaborative Project has been around for a long time. Alaska is part of the Pacific Northwest Girls Collaborative Project. We're in 41 states. Our vision is to bring together organizations that are committed to encouraging girls to pursue careers in science, technology, engineering, mathematics, and computer science. And the photos you see here are just one example of how we facilitate discussion among stakeholders by offering structured networking activities at every NGCP and local collaborative event. During what we call collaboration networking, dynamic discussions between individuals matching needs and resources can highlight ways for organizations to work together to impact the youth that they are serving. You might not know it, but you have been involved with the National Girls Collaborative Project if you worked on Science Action Club, which we assisted with a few years ago. We've been partially funded by the National Science Foundation since 2002. And while NGCP programs and partners are located in every state, our collaborative leadership teams work together to serve 20 million girls and about 12 million boys, because we know that many of the organizations that are serving girls are serving boys, and the strategies and the work that we do benefits both boys and girls. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over to Brenda, who's going to tell you a little bit about this equity and inclusion framework that we've created in collaboration with STEM Next for the Million Girl Moonshot. And then we'll move on to Alicia. So Brenda, I think you can take it away.
Thank you, Karen. Thank you everyone for being here. We appreciate it. And we are going to get to Alicia very soon, who's going to dig very deeply into cultural responsiveness. But we do want to give you a brief overview of kind of the work that has brought us here that leads into Alicia's presentation. So as Karen mentioned, the National Girls Collaborative Project is part of Million Girls Moonshot, which is an initiative funded by STEM Next. And as part of that work, we've developed what we call an equity and inclusion framework. And so I want to just briefly talk about why we developed a framework, what a framework is, and then go over briefly the framework for you, and then turn it over to Alicia. So a framework, if you're familiar with a logic model, it's really similar to a logic model. It's really a roadmap to help you see where you're going and how you're going to get there. So for our purposes, it's really about the direction of our framework is really about helping after-school programs and practitioners be more equitable and inclusive in their work of all learners. So that's kind of the goal. And then the framework helps you see how to get there. So frameworks also identify actions and interventions that are more likely to lead to the result that you want to get to. So they're informed by research and practice. And then really, I think one of the most helpful pieces of our framework is that it helps you narrow and summarize all of the various concepts and strategies that are out there in terms of equity and inclusion to help you really focus your efforts. And we also provide resources and tools to help you do this work. So now I think Karen's going to show our equity and inclusion framework. So this is specifically designed for after-school programs and after-school practitioners as you're thinking about equity and inclusion in your work and with the learners that you work with. And so just a brief overview, you'll see there are 3 main columns. The first one is really focused on broadening participation at kind of a really broad level. It includes strategies such as community engagement and data-informed decision-making. And then the middle column, the second column in gray, is focused on being youth-centric, really making sure your programs are focused on the youth that you're serving. It includes strategies such as positive youth development and being personally relevant to students. And then the third broad concept area, the third column, is skill development, which includes strategies such as the curriculum that you're offering, the professional development that you're offering. So within each of these broad concept areas, we have these smaller strategies to work on. And then within those strategies, we have what we call tactics, which are really more specific ways to go about achieving the strategies and to implement in your work. And I think Karen will put in the chat, we have this document and some supporting resources on our website on NGCP if you're interested in looking into that further. But really, I want to draw your attention to that dark blue band at the bottom of the framework, which says cultural responsiveness. So for us, cultural responsiveness is really an overarching concept that we integrate into all of the concept areas within the framework. So the idea is really to integrate cultural responsiveness in every aspect of the framework in order to foster equity and inclusion in our after-school programs, especially in terms of STEM. And to also recognize and include culturally responsive strategies at the organizational, personal, and instructional levels. That's kind of the progression of the columns on the framework. And so that is why we're here to talk much more deeply about cultural responsiveness today, seeing it as really this linchpin to the framework overall and to equity and inclusion efforts. So with that, I'm happy to turn over the presentation to Alicia Santiago.
Super, that was beautiful, Brenda. Thank you so much, and very nice meeting everyone. Let me see if I can share my screen here. Share. Is that good? Ha, I got it. Woohoo. All right, everyone. So, hold on one second here. I just need to adjust something here. Ah, very nice. Okay, so you see the beautiful photo, right? With the girls and the, oh, that's awesome. Excellent. All right, so what we're gonna do here is we're gonna have a dynamic presentation where I'm gonna do some talking, but you're gonna do a lot of it as well. And we'll have some interesting discussions. And the goal here is, of course, to share with you some interesting practices about how to implement culturally responsive, how to put together culturally responsive programs. But at the same time, I think this is a good opportunity for all of us to learn from each other, to learn a little bit about what you're doing in your programs and connect, which is really important, right? All right, so okay, so as Brenda mentioned, in this session, what we're going to do is talk about the importance of culture, in this case, in STEM, and its connection to equity and inclusion in STEM education. As you look at the equity and inclusion framework that Brenda just talked about, you realize that cultural responsiveness is really the construct that unfolds each of the categories of the framework. And this is really important because cultural responsiveness is really the foundation for the development of effective after-school programs. And I'm sure, of course, many of you know that, and because, of course, it supports equity and inclusion. And that's part of a great part of my work, focuses on creating more inclusive and genuinely equitable learning experiences in STEM. And just briefly, I want to point out at the beautiful photo there. The one on the left is a mural in Los Angeles, painted by an artist, Christy Sandoval, which is a Latino street artist in LA. And the mural shows a young girl in a field of flowers, releasing butterflies and parrots into the wild. And a lot of her art, she really wants to inspire young Latina or Latinx girls to have confidence in dreaming big and having goals to go to school and do better. The one on the right is really a quick photo, a nice photo of some young Kyrgyz girls that are, already dreaming big and pursuing their goal of getting an education and interested in following a career STEM, which is not easy for girls and women in Kyrgyzstan right now. So I just wanted to share that with you. I had the pleasure to meet them a while back. All right, so, okay, so as you know, the country is becoming more and more diverse in terms of course, culturally and ethnically diverse. And this diversity is reflected everywhere, right? Especially, of course, in schools and our programs, after school programs. And this leads to both challenges and opportunities for educators. Now, interestingly, Alaska is one of the 10 states with the most diverse public schools. And I just want people to tell me really quickly, you can use the chat box. Do you know where is the most diverse neighborhood in the United States? Anybody? Let me see, where's my chat here? Ah, great. So I just learned this. Eric says Mountain View, Anchorage, East High School. You guys know it all, of course. I was really surprised to find that out. I didn't know. Yes, indeed. So that's Mountain View in Northeast Anchorage, Alaska. I thought that was absolutely fascinating. Yes, so that's beautiful. East High School says, Mrs. Yes, beautiful. So now when you think about diversity, how does it show itself in your programs? When you stand before your students and the faces that are looking at you, do they look like your own? And the answer is probably not, right? We live in diverse communities, as we just talked about, like Mountain View. And so yeah, there's a great diversity in our schools and after schools. Now, do you know when you're working with your kids and youth, do you know what the cultural or ethnic background of the youth that you're working with? This is just to share with everybody because I think it's interesting to get a little understanding of who, about the youth that you're working with. So if you could share that with everybody, that'd be great. And of course, as many of you know, as educators, we really need to appreciate, right, and leverage this diversity to be effective in engaging youth and their families in our programs. And by doing so, we become culture responsive. Okay, so now let's talk about, I just want to make note of this. I see in the chat. Yes, Anchorage has 3 of the top most diverse high schools in the country, which is wonderful. And there are over 100 languages spoken in our Anchorage school district. That's amazing. Hispanic, Native, Alaskan, Russian. Interesting. Thank you. All right, so let's talk about culture. So have you ever thought about how your culture impacts the way you communicate with others or the way you teach and the way your students engage in learning? Is that something you thought about? And the truth is, we usually go about our life, right, our daily lives, without thinking too much about culture, right, and how our culture influences our thinking and, most importantly, our behavior. So if you want to describe, so when I say culture, what is culture? What do you think of when you hear the word culture? And again, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box. And you can share with just one word or one simple sentence. What do you associate with culture? All right. Very nice. Oh, ancestors, values, lifestyle, ethnic background. Very nice. Traditions, indeed. Yes, traditional practices and so forth. Yeah, so as you see here in this slide, culture usually gets compared with an iceberg. And why is this? Because an iceberg has a visible section of the surface of the water, right? And a larger but invisible section that it's below the water. And just as the iceberg, culture has some aspects of it that are visible and easily to identify and know, while we have other aspects of culture, we can only imagine them or we don't know much about, right? They're like below the surface of the water. Now, people often think of culture as the observable characteristics of a group, as you mentioned, some of them already, and things that we can see with our own eyes. But as Thomas is mentioning here in the chat, values, beliefs, norms, connections, right? So those are aspects of culture that we don't really see sometimes, right? So that would be like below the water level. So So, and yeah, so those are some of the ideas, maybe like our values, learn ideas of what's good, what's bad, right? What's right, what's wrong, what's acceptable, not acceptable. So those are the things that are not, we don't really see, right? Easily. So everyone has a culture, and that impacts the way we communicate and behave. So as I said, culture, it actually impacts everything in our life. The way we live, the way we see the world, the way we see ourselves, and the way we see others, right? It shapes the way we communicate and interact with other people. So we know that culture and learning are connected in very important ways. And as you know, it's often the case that educators and students do not have the same cultural, ethnic, or social background, right? That's very common. And this cultural divide makes teaching and learning much more difficult. So the truth is that teaching and learning is really a cultural activity. So if educators want to successfully engage students, it is important that they understand their students' culture, right? And their own culture as well. That's something that sometimes as educators, we don't think about, right? We think about, understanding the students and their culture and their way of living, but what about our culture? It's really key to understand our beliefs and our biases, most importantly. And this allows us to better communicate with students and bridge the cultural divide that I was talking about. So communicating effectively with youth is really key. It's really key to sparking interest and engagement in STEM. Oh, are you seeing? Oh, yeah, my cultural iceberg. It got flipped. Anyway, so that's what I wanted to talk about, some of the aspects of culture. And that just a nice little summary. But we talked about that already. All right, so as I was saying, diversity. Let's talk about diversity in the learning environment. So culture and diversity go hand in hand. If there's no diversity, there's simply no culture, right? So think about this. How is cultural diversity reflected in your programs? And again, if you want to share that in the chat box, I'll give a few seconds here to share. Think about your programs and how is diversity reflected in your programs? And as you know, diversity, of course, is the norm in most of our out of school programs. And that's why cultural communication is very, very important, and now more than ever, right? So teaching in multicultural environments leads to both. We have challenges, but it's also there are also opportunities. So how can you, as an educator, how can you engage your students in an effective way? Students that come from diverse communities, maybe, or they have diverse backgrounds. How can you do that? Well, it is common to see that educators, as I said, they don't have the same cultural and social background, and this can be problematic because you, as the educator, you use your own cultural lens, right, and experiential filters to communicate with your students. And in many instances, those filters are simply not compatible with the students, right, with the students' filters. So how can you bridge that disconnect? So for that, you have to be an effective communicator, right? That you need to be culturally competent in these cross-cultural situations. All right, what I wanted to do here is just briefly, just briefly talk about a couple of descriptions of what it means to be culturally responsive. You probably heard the term cultural responsiveness as well as cultural competence. And the truth is that at its core, they both mean the same. And I prefer to use the term cultural responsiveness, as sometimes cultural competency is perceived more as a state of proficiency, a state a static set of skills or a static destination, but cultural competency is really a dynamic process of learning, unlearning, and relearning. And I just want to emphasize that. It's really like a mindset or a sensibility that we acquire throughout our life. And in reality, as I said, it's really a long life endeavor. And it changes. That's really important too. It changes in response to our new situations, our experiences, relationships, and things that we experience throughout our life. These are just some brief definitions of it. Okay, so the first one here, it just briefly mentions the ability to learn from and relate respectfully with people of your own culture as well as from other cultures. I like here the word relate respectfully, right? That's key. Also responding respectfully and effectively to people of all cultures, recognizing, affirming, and valuing the worth of individuals, families, and communities. So that's very important as well. And this one talks about a set of congruent behaviors, attitudes, and policies that enable us to work effectively in cross-cultural situations, and the ability to work across cultures in a way that acknowledges and respects the culture of the person, right, or organized being served. So that's important. Yeah, so here we have in the chat, as Anne mentions, asking students to share their own cultural backgrounds. That's yes, and let them know all cultures from around the world is just as important as their Alaska Native American Indian culture. Indeed. Thanks, Anne, for sharing. Okay, so briefly, what is cultural responsiveness to you? And again, feel free to share your thoughts in the chat box. And Anne already started talking about this and sharing her thoughts on that. But as I mentioned earlier, becoming culture responsive is really a dynamic process. There's lots of things that influence and change our culture responsiveness. And they have to do with our cultural personal experience, as I was saying, right? And interactions with people, reflecting on our own culture and culture of others, education, right? Reading, traveling, professional development, and so forth. So there's lots of things that influence our cultural responsiveness. Yeah, and Karen makes a great point. A way to be culturally responsive is finding ways ways to not just acknowledge the student's culture, but to incorporate it. So we can talk about that here in a second. And before we get into our quick chat room, no, breakout room. All right, so a culture responsive educator also thinks critically about race, right? And actively works to identify and eliminate racism in the learning environment. Now, we are currently living in an important and powerful period in history. We recognize that we're experiencing the outcomes of more than 400 years of systemic racism, and we as educators are actively engaging in ways to address racism in our communities. So we know it directly impacts the learning experience of our students and many groups, right? So it is important that we focus on building culture responsive and anti-racist learning environments. Now, anti-racism is an awareness, right, of race and racism, and the commitment to take action to fight policies, racist policies, attitudes, beliefs, right? And it's a process, again, of unlearning racist ideas, also co-learning new ways of seeing the world, and engaging in work that is challenging, but that is required to make a meaningful change. And enacting policies, right, that manifest those changes are needed in our communities to make them, make our communities equitable for all. All right, so, well, let me see if in my next one. Well, I just want to mention that so when cultural responsive teaching and anti-racism work, when executed with the intention, right, it is really a practice that cultivates more equitable and inclusive environments and learning experiences for all. So that's something that we really need to focus on. Now, but for you, if you want to share your thoughts in the chat box, what does it mean to be culture responsive and an anti-racist educator? If you want to share that with us, feel free to do so. Let me check on the time. Okay, So anytime, just share your thoughts. And what we're going to do is go. Okay, so just briefly, Thomas says that being open to others, beliefs, and perspective, that's very nice. Yes. Felicia, learning basics of the cultures you're working with and respecting the culture while in your program. Indeed. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, so those are some of the points that you brought up here. I just mentioned here, a culture responsive anti-racist educator is really intentional about equity and challenges people's existing notions of race and uncovers how systems may negatively impact some groups and actively work against those findings. That person also has the knowledge, the attitudes, and the skills to successfully engage and teach students from different cultures. He or she also considers cultural differences as assets, right? That's very important. Values student strengths and skills and acknowledges each student potential. And as it was mentioned earlier in the chat, that person uses students' culture and knowledge and experiences to make the learning experience more meaningful for them. Okay, so now, let's have a discussion about specific practices at the practitioner level and the program level. I can share some that, some of those practices that are effective, but I think the goal here is you all work with different communities. You are already, right, implementing programs that are culturally responsive. So this is a really great opportunity to share that information and see what people are doing. So we're gonna go into a chat room and answer a couple of questions. So if you want to think about with the people that you're going to be discussing, think about at a practitioner level, right? What cultural responsive strategies have you used to teach and engage students in your programs? And I see that we talk about a little bit about that. So there were some ideas in the chat box. But if you want to, just write a few points here or just a few little notes on that with your group. And also at the practitioner level, what strategies have you used to make your programs more culturally responsive? And then we can share what we find here, your thoughts. Does that sound like a good plan? Thumbs up.
And just
okay.
to be clear, Alicia, you're going to ask them to come back and tell us about their discussion for each of these questions, right?
Yes, indeed.
Right.
So if in your group you want to nominate someone that would like to share, the thoughts of the group, that'd be great. If you want to put them in the chat, even better, right? So we can all have notes to share. That'd be wonderful. So who's going to help us? Maybe Eric?
No, actually, our technical support is going to send everyone into breakout rooms in just a moment.
Woohoo!
Here she goes.
Yay! We didn't tell them for how long.
We didn't tell them how long.
Oops.
I just realized that. I don't know if she set a timer. Did you?
We can broadcast a message to the groups. So tell me, how long do you think this will be open?
I think 10 minutes, right, Alicia?
Yes,
so tell them they have 10 minutes.
Okay, I'll let them know. I'll broadcast a message to them.
Thank you.
Wow, fancy.
Thank goodness for broadcast.
That's super cool.
Oh yeah, I just saw she messaged me. How long do you want them? I was warning her that it was coming.
Yeah, and in about 9 minutes, I'll let them know that they have like 1 minute left, and I'll bring them in because the rooms take a minute to close.
Yes, got it. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank goodness for you. Thank you.
Indeed.
That's
Is
what
everyone
I'm here
able to get
for.
into a room? It looks like.
Looks like there's a few people still in here that didn't go into a room, but they must have chosen not to.
That might be intentional.
Yeah,
That's
it's
all
not
right.
it's not a forced choice.
I want to make sure if they wanted to, they had the opportunity.
Right now, as I can see, we have 5 rooms with 4 people each.
Perfect,
Ooh,
thank you.
nice.
You're welcome.
Oh,
That'll be great, Alicia, because then they'll come back and report out, and that'll take us to the top of the hour, and then we still have another 20 minutes for questions.
yes.
If they have any, it's just open time, I think. So
That sounds good.
I love that piece about Anchorage. That's amazing that you discovered that.
I didn't know. I was shocked. Little
I didn't
did
know
I know.
either.
Isn't that cool?
I love learning things like that.
Yes, I did too. Have you been to Alaska?
I have been to Alaska 3 times. That's why I really wish that I could be there in person instead of doing it this way, because it's magical.
I
And
bet.
one time I was in Alaska like in January, December. I mean, when it's pretty dark, but it's still so majestic, right?
Yes. Oh, I have to go.
You haven't been to Alaska?
No, can you believe it? Shame on me. Brenda has. Has you? Have you? Yes.
Yeah, just for work a few times, never just, I mean, we've always done fun things too and touristy things, but it's always been for work, which I think has been super interesting because I think it's a different experience than just going as a visitor, right?
Yeah, I went for work twice, and then we actually went on one of those Alaskan cruises that was actually beautiful. It was much more like going on a nature thing. Of course, we were on a large, beautiful boat,
Yeah.
but you could go on all these amazing adventures from the boat, and you don't have to keep packing up and moving, right? And you see things that you wouldn't see except from a cruise ship, right?
Mm-hmm.
That was amazing.
Oh, that's something I really need to do.
We actually did the cruise for our 10th wedding anniversary. And now I just remembered that. Isn't that funny? Yeah.
That's a good idea. I should do
Yeah.
that. So maybe you've been to Mountain View and you didn't know it, that it was a
Right. I'm sure I
diverse.
haven't. I didn't. Well, I went to a conference in Anchorage, but it seems like we went out, right? And I went to a couple of schools. So maybe, and I didn't even know that.
Am I doing the report out? No, I forgot.
I think Brenda is.
Okay.
Yes, Brenda is. You'll still need to share your slides though, right? Because you have a, I'm going to do the, here's a list of resources and you have, that's on a slide.
Yeah, let's leave this slide up for the report out since it has the questions.
Yes, yes.
And how many rooms did she say there were?
She said 5, I think.
5, okay. So there should be 5. report
Yes,
outs.
5 rooms. There were 4 people in each room.
Great, thank you.
And I should be calling them back in 2 minutes.
Thank you.
Perfect.
Karen, you said you have more resource slides or something?
No,
No.
no, I just meant
just
you have a slide.
Yes.
It has the resources.
Yeah,
and
yes.
On the agenda, you have me closing and offering all those resources. So I just don't
Okay.
want you to shut down your PowerPoint.
Close it.
Don't do it. I need it. I need that PowerPoint up.
So I just called them back. The rooms will be closed in 1 minute.
Thank you.
If people are starting to come back, we'll wait just another minute.
I accidentally clicked out from my Zoom. So
Oh.
from my group. And I don't know how to go back.
Well, they're
That's okay, Ann. We
closing
really
now.
enjoyed you.
You can share in a large group. Nothing has been lost.
That's right.
It's okay. The perils of Zoom.
And it wasn't even, was it 10 minutes? Did we have 10 minutes?
I'm here, Ann. We're back.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So, it's like when our ancestors pass on, we lose that information. When my cousin passed away, I felt like my family, family historian. There was no one else to turn to. And I found other family members to, learn more about my culture. But when you lose that family historian, they take a lot of it with you. So it's really important for us to let our children know, ask questions while they're here. They're going to give you the answers.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Very well said, Anne. That's true.
I think everyone is back.
Are
We hope you had a fruitful discussion. We're able to connect with some others in this world, and we would love to hear anything that came up for any of the groups. Feel free to unmute yourself and let us know what your group discussed, points that came up, questions maybe that came up as well. Some groups had 3 people, that's fine. Who would like to start? Somebody from one of the groups willing to tell us what you talked about?
Yeah, I'll jump in for our group. Ava, please jump in too. So, what we talked about really was this notion of, Leo was talking about Anne Ween, her program up in Fairbanks, and how it is so very integrated into it that it is, that it's even down to the thinking of when we're putting a bulletin board up, or who are the stories that we're telling about, that it's not this typical, that our society said a white male scientist up there, is really looking at, how do we ensure that there's reflection of the student's culture and of the kind of diversity inside of just even down to that piece around whether it's the movie you watch or whether it's the bulletin board you put up or the books you read, that it's really thinking in it as a diverse way. And I think some of the other things we talked about too is that ability to really, try and ground it in that notion of localness and that relevance. So how do we take, even if it's rocketry, we're not a huge rocket area. I'd say Kodiak maybe a bit more relevant for them to have a rocket base. But the process or the action on how do you trial and error, how do you push yourself forward, or bringing that back down and allowing the young person to reflect about what does this look like, where in my life elsewhere is it, and giving young people that opportunity to have that reflectiveness. I would open it up to our other group members. Anything else?
Well, that sounds like a great discussion. I will, I'll see if anyone from your group wants to chime in before talking too much.
Hello.
Go ahead.
Hello.
Yes.
Yeah. So, I had typed in earlier about how we make sure that the children are able to acknowledge their cultures, besides being Alaska Native or American Indian, and to be proud of who they are and where they came from. And also talked about if the children know their ancestors' last names, it's really important too, especially in Alaska, because you can see a name, my maiden name, Ayapana. Oh, Diomede. But where I was born, Tinguk, my grandfather. Oh, Point Hope. So people know where who you are connected through the last names or the native given name that you have given to you by relatives.
And how meaningful that is, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's really interesting.
One other thing is Clarice had mentioned that they had someone who had worked in their program for many, many years, and she retired. And so luckily the lady that retired they were still able to call on her for advice or, something regarding someone that she knew last names of, or how that connects to maybe the children in that program.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's fascinating. That's something that I would not have thought of where I am. So that's really interesting to hear. And I liked how, and Thomas, in your points that you talked both about kind of the physical environment, but also the curriculum, right? So the posters you have on the wall, as well as the content and the curriculum that you're working with, that they're relevant and representative of the youth you're working with. So those are all great points. Is there another group that wants to share?
Brenda, can I say one thing?
Oh, yes.
That
Please.
came out of our group with Ann. I'm sorry, Ann, I just saw your message. Karen brought up a great statement that sometimes we often tend to not acknowledge. And that was like, in order for culture to take place, or any for us to address culture, we really feel like skin has to have color. So in order for us to address culture and have talks about culture, we always relate to skin tones. So I thought that was profound, just a wow moment that, you know, sometimes we have problems with having these difficult conversations if we're amongst people that look like us and that are similar to our same values, but it doesn't necessarily have to revolve around color. Like, we can have those conversations and have those safe talks. So I did want to make sure that we added that there.
Thank you. That's an excellent point. And we talk with educators a lot about that as well, because it's not always something that people think about, especially if they don't see some of that diversity around them, but it's really there. So thank you. I just got I think we have about 5 minutes until we break into our questions. So does somebody else want to share one thing from their discussion before we move back to Alicia? We appreciate the sharing so far, and we hope that you had some good conversations.
Thank you, Brenda.
Yes. Did you want to?
Yeah, so
finish
just
up before turning it back to Karen. Okay, go ahead, Alicia.
Yeah, just briefly. So these are some strategies that, you know, when we think about at the practitioner level, that really helps, right, to engage students and make our programs more culturally responsive. Of course, you know, there's it's important that we redefine what it means to be anti-racist, and really take the time to read and define what it means, and acknowledge the social construct of race and racism and the ideology of white supremacy, right? So understand the way our country operates and how our system is really engages with different groups of people. And also, it's important to understand how your culture, right, how it affects others, and engage in self-reflection, which is something important regarding your values and your attitudes, biases, and so forth. So that's really important. And as we talked about earlier, and people brought that up, get to know your youth, right, and build on their life experiences. That's super important, and provide opportunities for them to share their interests and personal experiences. And I'm sure many of you do that in your programs. It's also very important, communicating high expectations for behavior and performance, and let youth know that you believe in their capabilities. That's particularly important for many minority groups, right? And encourage their voices, encourage their student voices, and that's also very important. And one that I'm particularly a fan of, it's demonstrate caring. I think that's really, really valuable. Develop meaningful relationships with youth by engaging them personally and getting to know what they like and value. I don't know, we have maybe like 30 seconds if anybody wants to share anything regarding any of these practices, and how you maybe you do any of these in your programs. Anybody? You don't have to, but it'd be kind of fun. All right, and just briefly at the program level, of course, we all want to make our programs accessible and inclusive, and make sure that the program reaches all families, especially those that are in great need, and families from diverse educational, linguistic backgrounds, right? And provide opportunities to belong. That's also important. Foster a sense of belonging with youth, and you can do that by fostering well, by listening to their ideas and letting them make real connections to the activities that they're participating in. Again, building supporting relationships is also really key, and encourage these relationships, positive relationships between the staff and students. That's important. And something that I'm particularly a fan of, it's connecting what you're doing. And in this case, if you're running a STEM program, connecting the STEM experiences to the lives of the students, right? And that really increases the sense of belonging to STEM. And foster family, school, community involvement. Many youth and their families really, for example, value interpersonal relationships, right? And the family unit. So maybe you can promote your program as family friendly and so forth. And the last thing I just want to bring up, it's also important to evaluate the program, the impact of your program. And you can think about innovative ways of doing that, maybe getting feedback from program participants, and incorporate that input throughout every program element. Those are some interesting points that I just wanted to bring up. Okay, let's see. And oh, and of course we don't have time to this, but just briefly, these are some reflection questions. You know, what do you think the next steps could be for yourself as you continue to grow as a culturally responsive educator, anti-racist educator? And also, how do you intend on using this learning today to influence your colleagues, maybe your students and your organization? Feel free to share that in the chat box as well. But these are just a couple of things that we want you to think about. And Karen, do you want to briefly mention?
Sure, these are some great resources. You're going to get a copy of these slides, resources that we built this presentation on. And also, we will put our email addresses in the chat as well, so you can reach out to us at any point. And I know we're going to go into a Q&A in a minute, so we can go into answer your questions. Eva's got a great discussion question in there that we'd love to talk about when we go into our Q&A session. Do we have one more slide, Alicia? Is that it? I don't want you to end your presentation.
Yeah, I had a couple of resources.
I think it's one more resource slide.
Yes, that's it.
And if you haven't yet, please watch SciGirls. There's some great SciGirls resources around culturally responsive approaches, and also role model videos. Mm-hmm. And there we have our SciGirls strategies as well that have recently been re-envisioned. I think that's it for us. We're looking forward to our question and answer time.
Well, I'll just jump in and say really quickly that let's all give a great big virtual applaud, and please join me in thanking Alicia, Karen, and Brenda for today's workshop. We greatly appreciated you sharing your knowledge and expertise with us. I'm dropping a link in the chat box right now. Please make sure to fill out your evaluation for this workshop, not only so our presenters know how well they did, but also so that you can get entered into our drawing for door prizes at our final session of the day today. The workshop has concluded. However, if you would like to stay and ask questions or have a discussion with our presenters, the Zoom room is going to stay open for the next 20 minutes. Thank you all so much.
Oh dear, did we lose him? Go for it.
So my first initial thought is, okay, we place high expectations on our youth, and if they're too high, can that cause stress? And what I'm leading to is they should be realistic and achievable. And they also what was the other thing? I lost my train of thought, but realistic and achievable. Otherwise, we could be setting up our youth for failure, and they internalize that, right? They internalize it. Oh, I'm not smart enough. I didn't work hard enough, and on and on. The litany can go on and on with that. So that was my thought with that one slide.
I think that's a great thing to discuss, and I know Alicia has a few comments that I know Alicia has some comments around that. And I know especially now we're so aware, I mean, not just during the COVID time, but over the last few years of the stress that our youth are going through. So Alicia, what is your perspective around that?
Yeah, so I guess we have to think about not only high expectations in the sense that we want them to accomplish a lot, right? It's more also about challenging stereotypes that many of our youth face. So, for example, I work with Latinx communities, and there's this stereotype, that Latinos, the Latino students, they're lazy, they have all these sorts of issues, right? Stereotype ideas of and generalized ideas of what Latinos or maybe Black students or maybe in Alaska Native communities, the stereotypes that you face. So those are the things that really have a negative impact on students. So just going to school by themselves and to begin with, and in after school, they're sort of like set for failure, right? They as you said, Eva, they internalize all these beliefs, and that's what we really want to challenge, right? And as an educator, that's also what I mean, by saying that that you have to set high expectations, that they need to know that you believe in them, and that and also another way to doing this, it's by having, that's what I like, having these nurtured relationships, right? Where the person, where the student feels comfortable and at ease in the learning environment, and that's really important, because it's really giving them the sense of confidence, and they can really achieve and do well, right? That stereotypes don't matter, and that we acknowledge them, but we're going to challenge them, and you're there to help them challenge that. If there's anything else that either maybe Brenda or Karen wants to come up, to mention.
I'm admiring what Sophia wrote in the chat as well. Look at Sophia's comment, Alicia.
Oh yeah, aquí estamos, indeed, yes, teaching the youth that no matter what se puede, it is possible, right?
That's great, possible.
Yeah.
So that's an important goal.
So maybe it's more about about possibilities, right? Instead of expectations. Sorry,
yes,
Brenda,
possibilities as well, of course. Right. And, another thing that we do, for example, in Girls, that it's really important, about high expectations and possibilities. If you go into the program, you'll see we have all these different ways of engaging youth and girls specifically. And when we work with Latinas, we try to bring Latino STEM professionals to the classroom or to the wherever the program is taking place, so people can really identify with those STEM professionals, and especially if they're from their community, so they see that it's doable, that it's achievable. Is there not just stories of people that have done things and they can do it, but not me? But no, if you bring the person and the STEM professional that has really done a lot of accomplishments, and it's really good for young kids to see that, so that's the basis of a lot of the things that we do in Girls, which is role modeling. So we try to work with media role models. You'll see that in the website. There's lots of really wonderful, very short video profiles of different professionals, and some speak English, some Spanish, so some are bilingual, as I call it, in Spanglish. But they're beautiful. They're beautiful because they share their stories very short, and then kids can identify with them. And also in the programs, we try to bring in professionals from their community so that they can see what's possible. And another thing that maybe Karen should tell more about, it's through the National Girls Collaborative. There's a magnificent global database of wonderful STEM professionals, women, and from all over the world. And that's another way to reach students, right? Depending on their community and where you're at. There's great examples of women that are in very diverse careers. So that's another way to engage kids and see what the possibilities are. These women are there in this ginormous database of STEM professionals because they want to help you. They're there so that you reach out to them and ask questions and learn about what they do, their careers, and connect. They want to connect with you. So maybe we can put, oh yeah, Karen just
I put it in there. I had a little typo there at the end. I don't know how that H got in there, but it's called FabFems. It's an online database. It's an international database of women STEM professionals, very broadly. a very broad stem, who are willing to speak or tell their story or assist you as well. It's a very diverse group.
Leah, did you have a question? I think you're muted. You need to unmute. There you go. Thank you. Go ahead.
And I don't remember, I know it was at a conference, but I remember someone actually telling us to always assume that all students were headed towards higher education. And that often the piece is that we want to assume that white students are headed there, and to not have those expectations, even at the elementary school level, you know, for your non-whites. And again, it's always up to that individual and the family, you know, where that, if that student's going to go to university, or if they decide to go to a trade school or join the Air Force or whatever it is. But it was about having that high expectation of continued education for all students.
That's great. Thank you. That kind of helps us put in perspective that idea of just acknowledging that you believe these kids can do whatever they want to do, but then, you know, as we were talking about, making sure that it's well supported, so we're not setting them up for failure. But I mean, that's a great way to think about it as you're working with youth.
So I have a quick question. Well, probably not a quick question, but I'm going to have to jump off in a moment because I have to go to my next thing that I'm hosting. My question was around, you know, what do you do? And, you know, what are strategies for when you are working with a group of young people that's a diverse group, but you are seeing that, you know, whether it is the boy who's constantly in the driver's seat or the lead seat, or the white student who is in that driver's seat. So like the folks that we typically see in STEM or identify as like, oh, this is a boys thing, or this is you know, that white male scientist idea. Like, what do we do when you're like seeing that? Because I think so often you don't want to squash that student's engagement and excitement about the STEM activity. But you also recognize that you're allowing that kind of perpetuation of the norm for those other students. Like, do you have any strategies on like how you recommend on intervening in that case and giving those opportunities for others to be in charge of that design process, or to be the presenter or be the speaker?
Well, I'll say something, and then I know Brenda and Alicia have additional strategies. So my recommendation is that you have to prepare and scaffold for that ahead of time. So whatever activity you're doing, you know, you make sure that the groups are mixed. And so, for example, in a group of 4, every student has an opportunity to be the driver, right? Or to be the note taker, and you rotate that. And if you set that up in advance, then there's less intervening to do in the moment, right? You can't always set that up in advance, but you know, we see that especially in terms of gender, right? In terms of boys and girls, often we see those roles playing out, and it is difficult to intervene while it's happening. Brenda, Alicia, I think you probably have more to say, to add.
Yes, actually, and this reminded me another great resource. And it's from SciGirls. I put it in the chat. It's in the SciGirls Connect. If you go to the SciGirls Connect site, there's the what we call the SciGirls strategies. And these are really clever strategies based on research on how to engage girls. They also work with boys, but they talk about, and they actually give tips on how to address precisely what you're talking about. How, for example, when you're in a group, you want to give people or the kids or the young girls and boys roles, right? Like you're going to be taking notes, you're going to be, and rotate those roles, right? So it's always not the boy that wants to do the design and do the hands-on type of work, and the girls just taking notes, right? So you want to do that kind of thing and make sure that that you rotate responsibilities, for example, or if you have the chance, depending on what you're working on, if it's a design engineering problem or so forth, if you can give the, maybe an opportunity for girls to decide what they want to work on, or boys, and another occasion boys, and so forth. So it's really trying to find that balance. But as Karen mentioned, this is something that ideally you want to think about ahead of time on how to balance that. And again, the Sci Girls strategies have really good tips about that kind of stuff as well.
I think that's a great question, Thomas, and I don't think it's easy, but I was going to just jump on the last point that Alicia made, and this goes back to what you talked about in your group too, and that's about the content, right? The activity itself. So in addition to assigning people roles, I think we've seen some good success when girls especially, or, and not that all girls are the same or have the same interests, but if you allow them to choose an activity, or you purposely choose a topic or activity that they might have more prior knowledge in or more interest in, then they can take on the role more of the expert, which is something you want to switch around, right? Regardless of kind of culture, gender, different topics that different kids have that prior knowledge or interest or experience with. But I think those are all things to try, but it's not easy. It's a good question. Does that help?
Okay.
Thanks for joining, Thomas.
Thanks, Thomas. Good to see you again. These are some great questions and discussion.
I just want to say hi, Eva. Good to see you.
Hi, Han.
Yeah.
Yeah, story-based problem solving. I think story-based problem solving is great for all, right?
That's a great example.
It's a great example.
Thank you. I'm headed to the next session.
It was good to meet you, Eva. Thanks so much.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining us.
Yeah, you're right. We don't really always, it's not that we specifically just do it for the girls. We just notice that often, and I think there's actually even some data behind it that, we would give boys, say, like, let's just say Legos and say, okay, we're going to build a bridge. And they're just, right at it. But we found that the girls really liked it if we preceded it with a story or some information about the history of bridges. And it was like, they just really needed to come from that angle a little differently. Again, not just saying that the boys don't, enjoy it or benefit from it, but and I think that is a big part of why dolls are always kind of how they would want to incorporate their Lego people even differently, and because there was still that relationship between the humans and what they were designing were. So.
Yep, that's so true, and there is data and research backing up everything that you're saying, and I think that context is important. And why do you need a bridge? Why would you build a bridge? What do we use the bridge for? All those things make STEM more meaningful and relevant to their lives, right? And there's even some research showing that pictures of STEM things, objects, materials, turn girls off, whereas if it's a picture of a person using STEM or engaged in STEM, that can have a completely different impact on them. So that's great. I think it sounds like you're doing some great stuff, and it's definitely definitely evidence-based too.
I think the hopeful thing is that all of these things that engage girls are great for boys too, right? So, you know, there's no reason not to use these strategies or think in these ways for all your students. As it's not damaging for boys to see things in context.
Right. Another thing that we do when in the Side Girls programs, which I think is really great, is, you know, when the girls and or youth, they're working on an activity, we also give them the flexibility of sharing the results and in different ways. So kids can do drawings, they can talk about what they did. Some girls even, you know, they have, if there's time, they put together like a little play type of thing. So also giving them the flexibility to show what they've learned in whatever way they want to do it. It's fabulous. It's really engaging, and it really, and kids, you know, they really enjoy that. And I think that's important, that we don't tell them, okay, you need to do a graph. Now you're going to put A with B and you're going to show me this, or you're going to have to put together a poster. But maybe thinking about, you know, what are the ways that you'd like to share with us what you learned, and give them that flexibility. It's really important, I think. That would have worked wonders with me when I was in school. Oh, everything was just so square, I guess I have to put it. But that was a long time ago. It was like, even if you wanted to do things a different way, why? It was funny. But yeah, so I think that's important, to give them that flexibility and expressing what they learn in different ways. So this presentation goes to everybody, I'm assuming. It will be sent. I don't know. Eric,
I'm
will know
gonna
more about that.
Alicia, I'm gonna PDF. I think they're recording it
Yes,
and they're probably
we're all
posting it.
Ah,
But
oh, okay.
I'm
If you
gonna
have,
PDF. I'm gonna also create a PDF of all the slides and the resources together.
yeah,
So,
because the resources, I think you'll find those
Yeah.
interesting. And if you have any more questions or anything, reach out to us.
oh, Eric said everybody receives a digital copy.
Well, thank you all for joining us. We appreciate
Yeah, thank you so much. It's been great. And thanks to Eric for facilitating us so well.
Good to see you, Eric. Did you show up that baby?
Eric has a baby?
I do. I have a 2-year-old. She's at daycare right now with her mom.
Good to see you, Eric. Thank you, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks so much. Have a good rest of your conference.